Hello to all of you wonderful moms out there. This is episode 85 of Achieve Your Ambitious Mom Life podcast. I'm your host, Anoki Kapasi. Today, I have a special guest on the show. Have you ever felt like you're drowning in stress and constantly saying yes to everything, but then struggling to set the boundaries that you need between your work and your family life? Do you know that self-care is really important, but somehow it never seems to make it on your schedule? Well, that's just what we get to the core of with Daniela Wolf in today's interview. Daniela helps stressed and burnt out professionals set themselves up for success. She teaches how to productively manage daily tasks with ease and finding the time and energy for self-care every day. Daniela is a speaker, the author of the book Balance Breakthrough, a practical guide for busy professionals to take charge of their work, life, and well-being. And she also hosts the podcast Bestie Life with Daniela. She can help us learn the options and strategies that we have so that you can put yourself back onto your to-do list. She's here today to share those practical strategies for working moms who want to create better work-life balance and to help us prevent burnout before it happens. We talk about how to set boundaries and reclaim quality family time even when you're passionate about your work. You're going to discover why your passions might actually be setting you up for burnout, but then also what to do about it. She offers a simple 1-minute self-care practice that you can do throughout your day and how boundaries are actually a gift that we give to everybody else around us. So if you're ready to stop doing it all, protect your energy, and show up as the mom that you want to be, then share this episode with your group of mom friends. You're going to want to listen closely so you can achieve your ambitious mom life. Are you looking for a way to blend success and motherhood without losing sight of who you are? I get it. I've been there too. Hi, I'm Anoki, a PhD researcher, business owner, and homeschooling mom of 2 boys. As your life coach, I help moms like you create a life you love at home and at work. If you're ready to stop feeling overwhelmed, overscheduled, and overlooked, and want a clear roadmap to a balanced life, a meaningful career, and finally feeling like yourself again while being the awesome mama that you are, you're in the right place. In this journey to create the life you truly desire, it's time to rediscover your dreams and achieve your ambitious mom life. Hey friend, I know some of my favorite podcasts were discovered because someone like you shared them with me. If you're enjoying the show and finding value in these episodes, would you do me a quick favor? Take a moment to share your favorite episode with a friend who might need to hear this message too. It's super easy. Just tap that share button in your podcast app and send it to someone you think would benefit from it. Your share could be exactly what another mom needs to hear today. Thanks. Welcome, Daniela.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you because, self-care is so important to us as working adults in general. And you know that I speak mostly to high-achieving moms. Mm-hmm. So I know this is a everyone problem in the working world. In the US, we're like the most overworked country, I believe. Yeah. But we'll be having our conversation focused on mostly the things that plague the working mom and the high-achieving moms. Yeah, I just think that self-care is so important, and it just sadly never really makes it into our schedules. Yeah. And often ends up being this hugely missing component in motherhood, right? I am really excited to speak to you because you are a specialist in burnout prevention, which is amazing because why don't we just nip this in the bud before it becomes a problem? I am so excited to hear all of your tips, and you're absolutely an authority on this. You have a lot to say. You've written a whole book about this, I believe. So yes. Before I dive right in and start asking questions, before I do that and overwhelm everyone, do you want to add anything to?
Yeah. Thank you for all of that. Definitely having written a book and everything, it was a lot of kind of reflection as well, being an expert, not just based on everything I'm trained in as a social worker and all that kind of stuff, but I've also unfortunately been there, done that. I went through my own burnout when my kids were young. They were 4 and 6 months old. I was going through a divorce. So I was a single working mom trying to do it all, be it all, because I'm very high achieving. I take pride in what I work in, and I love my passions and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up driving myself straight into my own burnout because I wasn't asking for help. I wasn't taking care of myself. And so in turn, I wasn't showing up who I wanted to be, who I knew I could be as a mom. and who I wanted my kids to remember. I was irritable, I was snapping all the time, and I realized, something had to change. And so I started kind of practicing what I help everybody else with, because sometimes on the outside, we're great at helping everybody else, showing up at work, but not taking care of ourselves on the inside. And it was super small. I started with a daily gratitude practice, just 3 to 5 things every day I was grateful for. Our grocery store had free childcare at the time, and it was harder than it sounds to be able to leave my kids there and let go of the guilt of, especially if I ran into someone and they were like, oh, where are the kids? That guilt, that mindset of those limiting beliefs of people, what I assumed they were thinking, like, oh, she's, having someone else watch them. Oh, she can't handle it, that type of thing. And so it was a process of taking care of myself, making time for movement every day, because that's important to me. And slowly over time, built these practices, built these strategies to not overcome my own burnout, because not only was I showing up better as I did these things, my kids were too. It had such a tremendous effect on them, as well as people were coming to me based on things I shared or I was doing, either asking how I was doing it or sending me moments that they took time for themselves because of something I said or did. And I realized we're all looking for that validation and permission that it's okay to take time for ourselves. Because I think, again, that mindset piece can be really tough. And so that's a lot of what you would find in the book, which is Balance Breakthrough, a practical guide for busy professionals to really take charge of your work life and well-being. It's like guidebook. It's a do-it-yourself kind of like tool for you to really help yourself through that. So I love talking about this, sharing strategies, which I know we'll get to. So thank you so much for having me here for that.
Yeah, that was really great. I'm glad that you kind of gave us that high level overview, because I think your story is really relatable. I know that you were saying a couple times it's harder than it sounds, but I really think that this is a common story, and probably a common story in America and my listeners from around the world, but especially for high achieving women. And I think that the component you said about permission is so on point for many of us goal-oriented women. We're used to doing things on our own. We take pride in our independence. It's hard to give ourselves permission to then lean on someone else, or that if we feel like we're just not achieving to the level that we want, it feels like all of a sudden we're a failure, and even the mere fact of asking for help or seeing ourselves going in a downward spiral, it's easier to ignore it. Acknowledging it is like a sign of failure. I love that by giving yourself permission. And I talk about this a lot, but giving yourself permission, you're also teaching your kids, you're giving them the gift of one day they're going to be working adults, and they're going to want to know they'll hopefully be better equipped.
Yeah. My kids are older now. They're 24 and 20. So, you start where they're 4 and 6 months old. They're 24 and 20 now. And so absolutely, we've talked about, the impact that had on not only seeing me take care of myself as far as how that impacted how they now approach their stress, manage their stress, and take care of themselves. But it also taught them how to treat me, and when you put that out there to everybody, it teaches them, I respect my boundaries. And so are you. I take time for myself, and that's okay. And like you said, that permission, I think sometimes as high achievers, we're rule followers. I was always a rule follower. And so until we're given permission, we don't think it's okay to do things. And we don't realize we can give ourselves that permission. We don't need it from anybody else.
Yeah, we're really proactive when it comes to helping others or solving problems, whether it appears in the work situation or even in the world. But for some reason, we just find it hard when we feel like the only one we're helping is ourselves. When you just explained, and you'll probably talk about more, that when we help ourselves, we're actually helping those around us as well, which I think is just a really important mindset shift that we have to overcome. I also, and I hope you can get into this later too, so I'm just bringing this up so we don't forget, is that as you started working on going down your journey of recovering from this burnout and sharing what you were learning, it sounded like you started building a network because people were coming to you and saying, oh, I'm experiencing the same thing. And so I think that is not just learning to ask for help and leaning on others, but also just going through it with others and having that community is also another way of receiving support. Sometimes, even though motherhood is the most joyous blessing that I have, I think it's so important. It can feel lonely sometimes, but I think that maybe we do that to ourselves. And I'm always looking for strategies to be able to build a network and teach people how to build that network. We are like jumping so far ahead. It's just there's so much to say about this. So absolutely. I'm really glad to have you on. Okay. We want to know how we can start prioritizing ourselves. Let's just start with, why do so many working moms struggle with prioritizing themselves despite knowing how important self-care is? I think we can all agree it's super important, but it never makes it on our list. Yeah. Why?
Yeah. Because a lot of times when we're doing the things, one of the unknown kind of but bigger causes of burnout is when we're following our passions. And people don't realize that. People think burnout comes from the things we don't like, a stressful job, a relationship we're unhappy, and all that kind of stuff. But actually the things we're passionate about that we love can set us up for burnout more because we throw our boundaries out the window. You think about it, a relationship you're really invested in, a job you're your own business, that kind of thing, or especially kids, you know, you toss your boundaries out the window for the things you're passionate about because you go all in. You know, you're like, I love this. This is what I want to do. You ride those highs and lows of that situation so much more intensely because you're so invested. But like you said, it can also be so isolating. I can remember talking to a new mom and she was like, oh my God, you're my first adult conversation in like 2 days, because she was like just so all in on her kids and things like that. And you realize boundaries aren't a bad thing. Boundaries is one of my favorite B words. And having those boundaries in place is where you start to find some of that balance when it comes to having a job, having kids, doing all the things you like, but in a way that feels manageable, that feels doable, and that you don't get lost in the process, because that's what happens when we go all in and throw our boundaries out. We get lost and we're now identified by all these other things. And so, you know, like when I talk about work-life balance, a lot of times people are like, oh, you can't have balance. Everything can't be equal. And that's true. You can't. When I talk about balance, it's about how you adapt, pivot, have resilience, and then those boundaries. And so by being aware of the fact that you need all these other facets of your life, including you, including your self-care. And I know we'll talk about, you know, what that actually means, because I think that gets there's a lot of myths around that and gets a bad rap. But, you know, that's the first step, is recognizing you still need boundaries in place around your time when it comes to when you're working, when you're with your kids, when you're with your families, and you need these other facets of your life so that you don't get lost.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. That was a really important point about your passions also being a source of burnout, because one of the things that happens with your passions, like you said, you just get lost in it because not just losing yourself, but I mean, actually, usually with your passions, you're
you'll
finding
be like, I forget to eat. I do
exactly. What you're finding yourself, but you're losing yourself with time. I had a personal experience about this. I actually ended up writing this in a recent newsletter to my community, but I started this business, like the Solve for Mom business, with the intention that it was going to offer a form of flexibility into my life, right? Because I could be in charge of when I'm on and when I'm off, and I could work my own hours. I homeschool my kids. Family time is for me, my priority. That's the thing that really makes me sing, and everything else was ancillary to that. But I still want to have something for myself that I feel like I'm helping others. I'm making an impact in some way. I'm a scientist by training, so I'm an independent, consultant. So I have all these things going on, but I chose to build this business because of the flexibility. And what I started seeing was that because I was so excited about it, I'm seeing traction, and I'm helping people, and it's just energizing me in a certain way. But it started to become a little all-consuming, where I just wanted to do more and more and more. And it wasn't until I had a recent conversation with my husband that I realized that I was overstepping all these boundaries I had set in place so I could be there for my family, so I could be there for myself. I was dropping my morning workouts and things like that, right?
Yeah.
I started to intentionally slow down. I started to become a little more mindful. I started to say, okay, I'm going to work on one main goal a day. I limited my hours. I prioritize other things throughout the day. So I'm not sure where any of these strategies fall into your strategies, but I became very intentional about it. But the first step for me was that awareness. Yes. And it wasn't me who became aware of it. It was when I was talking to somebody close to me, my husband, that he needed to point it out to me. And then I was like, ooh, I'm headed down a track of burnout.
Yeah.
And I started to make shifts.
It's a slow process. You don't even realize it sometimes at the time, because you think I'm having fun. I love this. I'm doing good. Yeah. And you don't realize, like you said, those boundaries are starting to get compromised, and it might start off small, but then it's like, we don't realize until it's too late,
Yeah.
And that awareness piece that you mentioned is huge. That is that first step of having some kind of awareness that something has to change. Because the practice that I teach, it's based on your mindset, your time planning, and your self-care, because I believe when you think differently, you feel differently, and you feel differently, you act differently. So you really need that thought part to have your actions have meaning. Because if you jump straight to the actions of just doing things differently without that awareness of why, what's the impact, what's the purpose, all that kind of stuff, you won't have that emotional attachment to it, and the actions don't actually have the same benefits.
That is so good. And actually, it really relates quite a bit to life planning, which is what I teach. That's the main tool that I use. But it's exactly the same steps, but it's just at a broader scale in terms of planning out your life and your life vision. But yeah, it's the same thing. You have to do this inner work, self-discovery. Bring all this awareness. A lot of times, I'm sure when you start going into the self-care and stuff with your clients, it's the same thing, but a lot of moms tell me that they hadn't thought about these things in years, sometimes 10 years, they just turned that part of themselves off. And
Right.
so it's like that awareness part and self-discovery and reflection, and then doing all of the planning, and then kind of working high level, getting the bigger picture figured out before you go down to the time and component and the nitty gritty stuff. So I think it really correlates really well that if you don't, a lot of times people try to do these time management hacks, right? Where it's like, oh, I'll just do this thing and it's going to save me an hour here or an hour there, or next week I'll be able to cut off this whole time block, right? That can help you, but that's not sustainable if you don't understand, like you said, the purpose behind things. So when you understand the purpose behind your goals, the purpose behind your vision, and you understand what your values are and what's driving you, all of that stuff, when that's figured out, then you can start making these changes. And self-care and, burnout prevention is absolutely a part of all of that time and energy management component. We're definitely going to talk about tacticals in a second, but I want to squeeze in one more question, sort of more background level. Can you share how burnout specifically affects working moms and what signs should they be watching out for in their daily lives? Like some of the red flags, maybe.
Absolutely. Because like you said, burnout, it creeps up slowly. It's not like all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I'm so burnt out. It's these small little shifts that we start to make in our actions that start to impact us. And I almost want to back up a little bit and talk about the difference between stress and burnout, because I think those two words get used interchangeably and they're actually very different. Stress is actually okay. It's okay to have stress in our life. Stress helps motivate us. Stress can come from good things. You look at some of the happiest days of your lives, getting married, having kids, are actually the highest on those stress scales and things like that. So it's not about eliminating stress, because I think that's what people assume, like, oh, I just have to get rid of all the stress in my life and I'll get rid of burnout. There's an analogy that I saw once that I love to talk about, where imagine you're sitting in front of a bonfire. And so you're putting more logs on the fire, and that's stress. And if you put the logs on intentionally, you make those little teepees, you leave some space between them, you get a really great fire. You get a lot of energy, right? From strategically planning those stress, which is those things in your life, the things you have to do, in a way that's manageable. So you have this wood pieces, you stack them on top of each other without any space, without any intention or planning. You just kept saying, yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I'll do this. And now you've burnt out, and imagine that with that fire, it's completely just those gray, ashy embers. You might be able to fan a little bit of a warm glow from it, but it's lost its energy. It's lost its spark. And that's what happens to us. We've lost our energy, our motivation, our spark. It can look like, just a complete lack of ability to function at the high extreme. It can also look like cynicism. It can look like, the things you used to love. Now you've got that edge to it. It can look like, it can look like sadness. It can look like depression. It can feel like going through the motions with an emptiness inside. There's a lot of different ways it can look like and manifest depending on what stage you're at, who you are as a person, all those kind of things. But again, that's, it's kind of like waiting to have a heart attack to address what, health and wellness in your life. And so the whole point of trying to do this from a mental and emotional standpoint, that might be a physical example of handling too much stress. We need to think of our mental fitness the same way we do our physical fitness, so that we can take care of ourselves on a day-to-day basis to prevent burnout, to prevent getting to that point where we can't emotionally and mentally function on a day-to-day basis, because that extreme does take it to the physical level as well.
Got it. Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of stuff in there that you said that was great. Thanks for making that distinction, by the way. And the analogy was really helpful. In fact, I can track back to different periods of my life where that was me. So it was good to have that visual. Let's get into some tactics so that my listeners can actually start using some of the stuff you share with us today.
Yeah.
What are some practical strategies that you recommend, especially for busy moms, maybe overwhelmed, where they can add self-care back into their day, especially when we all feel like we just don't have enough time in the day?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, the self-care is the part of the process. You're going to look at your mindset, because if you just do the actions, but you're sitting there still running through your to-do list or feeling guilty while you're doing it and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to get those benefits. So make sure you have that awareness and intention when it comes to your mindset, so you might not jump straight to the self-care, but you're going to do that. The time planning, like you said before, you can carve out blocks of time. You can do all these tips and tricks to gain back an hour here, 15 minutes there. But unless you're intentional about how you use that free time, we end up actually like spending it without even realizing where it's gone. So there, that's another part of the process. And then that last part is that self-care. And like I said, I think self-care gets a bad rap because it's seen as a luxury, as a nice to have, as something fluffy, like just only spa days and massages and getaways. And while those things are nice, they're not sustainable on a day-to-day basis. You can't do that every single day. And so when I talk about self-care, it's an essential eating, sleeping, brushing your teeth on a day-to-day basis. And so it encompasses 8 different areas, this really practical form of self-care. And it's everything from how you eat, how you sleep, how you move, how you dress, how you decorate and organize your home, how you connect with others, how you think about money, as well as in that traditional personal development, like meditation, mindfulness, journaling, all those kind of things, gratitude practices and whatnot. And so when you look at it from this different focus with these 8 pillars, you see that it's a lot more achievable in a lot of different ways because you can add it in so many different ways and it can look different on a day-to-day basis. And being able to be consistent in a lot of these areas doesn't take a lot of money, doesn't take a lot of time.
We all have to eat. We all have to sleep.
I'm going to share with you guys a simple 1-minute practice that you can start integrating into your day-to-day so that you can start to then see where some of the benefits come from. And so it's so simple. You're going to set a reminder to go off on your phone, and you're actually going to schedule that for 5 times a day. And then once that reminder goes off, you're going to set a timer for 1 minute, and you're not going to do anything else. You're not going to check your email. You're not going to scroll on social media. You're not going to throw a load of laundry in. You're just going to sit for 1 minute. And during that time, you're going to maybe focus on your breathing. You could do box breathing where you do 4 seconds in, 4 second hold. I like to do 6 to 8 seconds out and then another 4 second hold. You do that box breathing. You can do some shoulder shrugs. You can have some water. Maybe if you have a window nearby, you can look outside, take in some nature, or even sit outside and get some nature. And just for 1 minute, because you don't realize how long a minute is when you're not doing anything else, science has shown your heart rate starts to slow down. Your cortisol levels go down. Your stress levels go down just in that 1 minute, as well as you get the dopamine hit of you set a goal and you achieved it. And now you have a 5-minute self-care practice by doing that simple 1-minute exercise 5 times a day. Maybe at the end of 1 minute, you're like, oh my gosh, I've got another minute. I'm going to, maybe take a couple steps here and there. These small micro moments throughout our day is where we start to build the practice part of it and the consistency that it's going to happen every single day. Like for me, I bookend my day with my self-care for sure. I always do movement in the morning and then I have a routine at night. And in the morning, maybe some days I only have 10 minutes. Maybe some days I have 30 minutes, but it happens every single day. So some days I might do a 5-minute yoga routine and a 5-minute meditation. I might do a 20-minute yoga or I might take a walk outside with my husband and my dogs and things like that. But it always happens consistently, regardless of the amount of time I have. Same with my nighttime routine. It involves my skincare and reading from a book. Some days it's 3 sentences that I fall asleep. Some days it's 3 pages, but the consistency part of it is where you get the benefits of it. Because self-care isn't just about that immediate sense of calm and relaxation. Self-care actually, it brings you energy, it brings you confidence, and you're kind of like the weather man in some ways. You talked about how it benefits everyone else around you. How you feel when you walk into the room, it affects everybody else's mood. You're either going to put people on pins and needles from the tension that you bring, or you're going to show up confident and calm in a way that's going to help everybody else feel the same way as well. You're going to be able to respond rather than react when those unexpected life moments happen. And that's where you really start to get those benefits because you're in a constant state of low stress levels, low heart rate, and those types of things by practicing these micro moments. Just even thinking about how you dress every single day. We don't always put a lot of thought into it, but think if you're wearing something that you look really good in and you run into somebody, you feel good versus you're like, your hair's, maybe hasn't been washed in 4 days and you're a ratty sweatshirt with some holes and things like that. Your confidence is going to be affected by how you're showing up. Your home, you start and end your day there. That's your safety place. That's your place to just unwind and be yourself. And it doesn't have to be like Martha Stewart perfect or anything like that. It's about having, the things that you enjoy there, as well as being able to find the things that you need when you're there. So you're not, searching for your keys for 20 minutes every morning. These simple, small little like strategies, habits, practices will create a different flow and rhythm to your day and your life where all of a sudden self-care isn't something you do. It's just part of who you are in different moments as you show up, because they all affect each other. You think about, like money. People are surprised to hear that that's part of your self-care, but how you think about money has a huge impact on, if you're excited to be spending money on a trip or if you're stressed because it's for a car payment. It could be the same amount of money, but the thoughts we have behind it change how we feel. And if you're stressed in a negative way, I don't know about you, but I might not sleep great if I'm stressed about money. And then when I don't sleep great, I'm going to be irritable and I'm not so great to be around the next day, as well as I crave carbs and then I don't eat so great the next day. And then maybe not as motivated to move. And so there's a cyclical way that all these different areas affect themselves. And so again, having that balance of finding micro moments, not just in one place, but in a couple of different ways throughout your day. Maybe you've got some bunch of errands to run, but you park at the farthest spot of every parking lot. Now you fit in some movement that you didn't even realize being outside. My son uses his commute home every day to call me. And so there's that connection piece of like, we talk every single day. Maybe it's only for 10 minutes because that's his commute, but the consistency is where you start to build then the strength in how these different habits can affect you.
Yeah, that was a lot of juicy information. Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that I would like to probably mention is that many of my listeners have really young kids as well. I personally like to have some quiet time as part of my self-care. I just need no one talking to me for a little bit. Like I could go a whole day and not talk to anyone. I'm totally fine being a loner, but I'm fine also in a social setting. But it's just that I really enjoy just having peace and quiet sometimes. So sometimes I'll tell my kids, actually I did this the other day, I just need 5 minutes, right? And I know you're suggesting 1 minute even, and that might be more manageable, but they cannot go 5 minutes and not interrupt, not, mommy, I need this, right? And they're the sweetest little things. And so I, of course, oblige. But what I started to find was that one thing that helped with kids, at least, is having them join you in, like in that breathing practice, in the mindfulness. I have these really awesome, this like pack of mindfulness cards that are geared towards kids, but adults absolutely benefit. So, and we have a homeschool, so we can just do this in the middle of the day, but really anyone can do this. I love it. There's just like so many varieties of mindfulness practices, and they're really fun for kids to participate in. And they really look forward to it. And we just do that. And it just takes like a minute sometimes. A lot of breathing involved as well. And so I just wanted to put that out there, that I really love the suggestion of taking the minute here and there. But if you do have kids that make it tricky for you to do that, sometimes even a minute is too much to ask for with them, then teach them. Have them join you. And in the beginning, it may not be an uninterrupted 1 minute, but over time, they're going to learn to do it and really look forward to it. And you're doing like the connection and all of that stuff all wrapped into one. So I really, really love that. And I also wanted to bring out that point you made about the micro moments. I think that is such a big thing. I also really emphasize micro actions when it comes to your goals or building routines, or I just think that a lot of times we do this all or nothing sort of attitude where in order to make a change in our life and we want it to be, I don't know, a remarkable change, we need to change everything all at once, this big, massive change. I mean, when I talk to successful business owners, when I talk to athletes, when I talk to, here you are talking about burnout prevention, it's the small things that we do, that we tweak and refine, just like this 1% change here and there, that all add up and compound into, it's sustainable and actually ends up becoming impactful because it all adds up, right? You're like, you're depositing a little bit into your 401k kind of thing, right? And eventually becomes a bigger, reliable thing. But
I want to go back to the kids part too, because you definitely, that's the thing. I think the other myth with self-care is people take the word self way too literally. They think it needs to be done alone in isolation and that type of thing. And granted, I'm an introvert myself. And so I definitely recharge alone more than I do around other people, where, like I have a cousin who's an extrovert who like loves being around other people. So definitely, that could be one piece of your self-care, but self-care, can be loud. It can be laughter. It can be with friends. It can be with your kids, all that kind of stuff. I love using bubbles with kids, especially for the breathing, because I think their mind goes off, and it's harder to keep them focused. But bubbles are such a great way to teach kids mindfulness breathing, because they can recognize you can't blow bubbles fast or else they pop. Plus it's a little, sometimes silly for adults to be like, let's go blow bubbles. And they're like, what? But to show them the power of play and to integrate that, is so huge and important. And actually, I have a free resource your listeners can grab from my website. It's called Reclaim Your Time in 10-Minute Blocks Cheat Sheet. And it's it has strategies not only for over 20 self-care ideas you can do in 10 minutes or less with your kids, but it also has some suggestions for how to keep your kids busy so you can carve out some of that time as well. So it offers both of those opportunities for alone self-care and with your kids.
Awesome. I will absolutely link that in the show notes. So thank you for that. So one more thing that you touched upon, and I really emphasize in my work, and that'll lead into our next question, is just the idea that being intentional. I do feel that planning is a huge part of the puzzle here, because a lot of times if you are more intentional with your time and you take a little bit of time to figure out what you're going to do in terms of self-care, in terms of setting those boundaries or preventing burnout or managing your time, you're actually freeing yourself up. That is a form of self-care. Like planning in itself is a form of self-care because it reduces all of that mental load that you have. You don't have to worry about, oh, is that thing going to get done? It's this treat you're giving yourself because it's that permission part, it's the mindset part, all of that time management part, all wrapped into one when you take the time to plan. I think that if we wanted to extend that sort of line of thinking, life planning itself is a form of self-care, just at a more long-term scale, because you're setting out what are the different things I can do to make myself more happy, to make myself more free, to allow myself to do the things that I like to do, right? Related to that, then, how can working moms create better boundaries between work and family life? Is it simply time management and planning things out like I talked about, or is there more to it?
Yeah, it's a combination of a couple things because it is complicated. Some weeks, depending on your job and what you have going on, might be more work heavy. That's just how it is. And some weeks you might be more family heavy depending on what you have going on there. So definitely allowing yourself some flexibility to, again, adapt and pivot is where some of that balance is going to come from. Not every day is going to be perfect. You might have a plan in your head, but definitely, that boundaries piece then of that balance is going to be so important. And communicating our boundaries, that's the other thing. I think people think boundaries are bad. They're a wall, they're a no, that it's something that is leaving people out. But actually boundaries are very inclusive. Boundaries help people know when they can come in. And when you communicate those boundaries, it's actually kind of a gift you give to everyone else because it allows them the freedom then to plan around it accordingly. You think of, if you wanted to go to your favorite coffee shop, but every time you showed up, the doors were locked because they didn't have their hours posted outside. So you never really knew when you could go there. You're going to get annoyed. You're going to get frustrated because it's not available when you wanted it versus they have their hours on the door. They have them online. You clearly know when they're available. They've communicated to you that now you can plan accordingly and you're not upset that they're closed on Sunday because you knew that, because their boundary was clearly visible. And so it gives you the freedom. If Sunday, say, is family time only, no phones, no work, or whatever you want to put in place, when you communicate that, you don't feel guilty by not checking your devices. You feel the freedom to 100% dive into that family time because you've communicated and everybody knows that's where you're at. And, there's no need to, I should check and just make sure nothing important came through, all those kind of things. And it can be, figuring out what you need from a boundary standpoint and how you're going to communicate that is going to be key, but then allowing that grace for life to happen and be able to adapt and pivot so that, like I said, it's not about things looking perfect and equal all the time, but in a way that feels right for you, and recognizing maybe over the course of the week is where you feel that balance, maybe over the course of a couple of weeks or a month. And that's where you start to kind of, you almost have to retrospectively look back at your calendar and see what it looked like. And don't just write down the work stuff, because that's the other thing we do. We only write down our work commitments. We don't write down time for a bike ride, time for a walk, sit and journal. We don't write down all those other things. And so we don't recognize how much they are not happening, and they don't have the same weight and importance. And so as soon as you start to communicate all these different things, intentionally put them on your calendar, is how then you have those boundaries then in place that not only you respect, but so will everybody else. So maybe it's an outgoing email, like, thanks so much for reaching out. These are my business hours. I'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it really helps to kind of do like this time audit where you see how you've been spending your time. And I do this time alignment coaching where we go through actually trying to become a little self-aware about how we're spending our time and also figuring out how we want to spend our time and what our priorities are. And then seeing that gap and starting to little by little click things into place and get them to, your time and energy to match more towards your ideal. And I think thinking about burnout prevention or the bad kind of stress, not the important kinds of stress, incorporating that into when you're adjusting your time and schedule is really important. I like the thing about boundaries being a gift, and what I often talk about, and I think this is basically what you were also saying, is that sometimes it feels like selfish or hard to say no. But what you're really doing is saying yes to so many other things. It goes both ways. When you're saying no to something, you're saying yes to something else. But also when you say yes to something, maybe it's something that is not a priority that you shouldn't be doing, or that's not self-care. You're actually saying no then to those important things and self-care.
And you can even like, when people come to you and you can say yes, but then you kind of tap into that time piece of yes, but not right now. It can be a yes later, like think of like with PTAs, they have 100 million things they need you to volunteer for. Maybe this week, this month doesn't work for you. Your response can be, thank you so much for asking me. I would love to be a part of it. What's coming up in the next couple months that I could do? And then you can plan ahead maybe 2 months out so that it does fit in your schedules, so you have that boundary. So it can still be a yes, but just do it on your own terms.
That is golden, because I think for us high achievers, it's just, we still want to help. There's the stuff that tugs at us that says, hey, I still want to do this. It's just, again, what am I going to say yes to now? And I just think that's a really great reframe. So thanks for that tip. You've given us so much amazing information. I have one more question for you, Daniela. Mm-hmm. I teach moms how to create impact by showing up authentically at home and at work. Mm-hmm. What is one thing that you would like to do in this world to make a difference?
Besides what I'm doing? I mean, this is
whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I think learning grace has been, for me, actually part of the hardest part of some of this. And that's an area I find a lot of people are having a hard time with, is just giving ourselves the grace to be human. Again, we're high achieving. We want everything to be perfect, whether it's our kids' birthday parties, how things look, all these other things, how we're showing up at work, our relationships. We just want everything to be perfect. And I think giving ourselves the grace for things to not always be perfect, to just understand it's messy sometimes. Mm-hmm. And it's okay to embrace that messy. Like you said, when we start to share not our perfect moments, but our vulnerabilities of what didn't go well, that's where we connect. That's where people are able to let their guard down and be like, oh my God, thank God I'm not the only one. And so to just allow ourselves to get comfortable in that messiness and have the grace to give ourselves the same kindness that we give to everybody else, because that's a lot of, again, where those limiting beliefs come from. We would never talk to anybody else the way we talk to ourselves. We would never tell someone, yeah, you should really keep pushing yourself. You're slacking, you're doing these things. And yet in our head, that's absolutely when it could come up. So embracing that grace of self-kindness, of messy imperfection and humanness. Mm-hmm. When our kids see that from us, again, that helps them to realize, oh, even our parents aren't perfect and that's okay. They can apologize. They can admit when they're wrong. They're not entitled to certain things, all those kind of things. It's such a great model for them, as well as it helps connect us to so many other people from those shared experiences. Because I'm still working on that one too. Like for me, that's one I know I'm working on as well. So just embracing the mess is what I help people with.
You see a world where grace is more readily embraced, basically.
Absolutely. Let go of the perfection. Let go of the, Pinterest perfect.
Oh, I love it. I love
Pinterest,
it.
But
yeah, no, I get you. Well, thank you so much, Daniela, for making the time to be here. And I think it's really special to have somebody on who can speak from experience, but then also from authority, because you clearly have thought a lot about this. You've produced a lot of work on this. So I think that you've brought a lot of value to my listeners. And where can my listeners find you? List all the places.
So my website is bestdlife.com, and you'll get access there to my podcast that you're going to be on shortly, blog posts, free resources, my book, How to Work With Me, all that kind of stuff, as well as I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Pinterest, and Instagram at Best D Life. And my book, Balance Breakthrough, Practical Guide for Busy Professionals to Take Charge of Their Work Life and Well-Being. It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. So definitely check it out.
Okay, ladies, there you have it. Daniela Wolf of the Best D Life podcast. I'm going to link her details in the show notes. Well, it's been wonderful having you on the show. Thank you so much. We should stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait to have you on my show.
I hope today's episode will help you create time and freedom to pursue something you love to do. If you enjoy this show, please subscribe and tell other purpose-driven mamas about it. Who knows? You might even make a new friend by sharing a tip. It's all free. By the way, it would be amazing to hear what you think about the show when you leave a review on Apple Podcasts. After all, my passion is to make this a great experience for you. I'll see you next week for another episode of Achieve Your Ambitious Mom Life with Anoki Kapasi.